Lucas had spent the morning working his land. The sun was high, casting its warm rays over the cracked earth of the barren farm. The soil, once rich with crops, had grown dry and lifeless. The war had taken everything from him. The crops, the animals, and now, it seemed, even the hope of peace. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, looking out over the farm, his thoughts heavy. The land was quiet, too quiet. Ever since the war had begun, there had been nothing but noise. The roar of warships in the sky, the distant thundering of gunfire, and the cries of the wounded. Yet today, there was only silence, the calm before a storm. As he bent down to fix a broken fence post, Lucas heard something. At first it was faint, just a whisper in the wind. But as he stood up, the sound grew louder. Footsteps. Someone or something was approaching. Lucas tensed. His hand instinctively reached for the rifle hanging by his side, but he quickly stopped himself. There was no use in fighting now. The enemy wasn't human anymore. He had learned that much. He turned toward the sound and saw a figure staggering toward him. The figure was tall, slender, and covered in strange, shimmering armor. For a moment, Lucas thought it was one of the soldiers from the invading alien fleet. But then, he noticed the red streaks staining the figure's clothing. Blood. The figure was injured. His heart raced. The alien invaders were ruthless, but this one looked different. As it came closer, Lucas could see the features of a young woman, her skin pale, almost translucent, and her eyes a bright, glowing green. She was barely able to stand, her body trembling as she leaned heavily on a staff for support. "Help," the alien woman whispered, her voice weak and breathless. Lucas hesitated. He had seen many of them, alien warriors who thought nothing of human lives. He had heard the stories of what they did to prisoners. But this woman, she didn't seem like the others. Her clothes were torn and she was covered in dirt and blood, clearly from a long journey. Her condition made him pause, and he noticed that her eyes, those glowing green eyes, held nothing but fear. Before he could make up his mind, she collapsed to the ground. Lucas rushed forward, instinctively bending down to check her pulse. She was still alive, but just barely. His heart ached. It didn't make sense. Why was she here? What had happened to her? "Stay with me," Lucas murmured, gently lifting her head. He could feel her weak breath against his hand. With great effort, Lucas managed to get the woman onto his feet, supporting her as best as he could. She was surprisingly light, almost fragile, and it struck him again just how different she was from the soldiers he had seen. Lucas had one decision to make. The soldiers would be searching for anyone like her. If they found her here, she would die. He couldn't let that happen. He needed to help her. But how? Looking around, he spotted his old barn, its wooden frame creaking in the breeze. It was the safest place he could think of. He could hide her there, at least for a while. With one arm wrapped around her waist, Lucas guided the woman toward the barn. Her head rested on his shoulder, her breathing shallow and faint. He could hear her whisper something, but it was too soft for him to understand. When they reached the barn, he set her down on a pile of hay in the corner. He quickly went to work, grabbing cloths and warm water to clean her wounds. He moved as quickly as he could, trying to stem the bleeding and make her comfortable. His heart pounded as he worked, his thoughts racing. "Why did you come here?" he whispered under his breath. The woman, still barely conscious, managed a weak smile before she closed her eyes again. Lucas finished cleaning her wounds as best as he could. The alien's injuries were extensive, and he wasn't sure how much longer she would last. He cursed himself for not knowing how to heal wounds like these. He could only do so much. The day was beginning to fade, the sky turning a brilliant orange. As the sun began to sink behind the hills, Lucas sat back on his heels, exhausted. The alien girl's breath was steady now, but she still hadn't awakened. The silence around them was unsettling. He glanced out the barn's door, watching the sky grow darker. His mind wandered to his horse. His last horse. He hadn't ridden it in months, but it was still there in the stable. The horse had been a gift from his father. the last connection he had to his old life, to everything that had been lost. Lucas stood, his legs aching from kneeling for so long. He slowly made his way to the stable, his eyes never leaving the horse's stall. The animal was calm, as if sensing his thoughts. It was a strong horse, one of the last of its kind. Lucas couldn't bring himself to sell it. He couldn't let it go. But now, he walked up to the horse, running his hand along its mane. "I'm sorry, old friend," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "But she needs you more than I do." Lucas led the horse out of the stable, guiding it toward the barn. The alien woman had shown him nothing but fear and pain, but she was still a person, still alive, and she deserved a chance, maybe even more than he did. As he stood in the barn doorway, the horse ready to be given away, he felt something shift within him. A sense of duty, a sense of honor. He had nothing left, but he couldn't turn away from her. Not now. He moved toward the woman, carefully placing a blanket over her to keep her warm. The sun had completely set now, and the barn was dark, save for the soft glow of starlight streaming through the cracks in the wooden walls. "I'm giving you my last horse," he said softly, as though the woman could hear him. "I hope it's enough." The night was long, filled with the sounds of the wind outside the barn and the occasional rustle of the hay. Lucas couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, images of the alien girl flashed in his mind. Her pale skin, the blood on her clothes, and her soft, fragile body. He knew she was barely hanging on, and that knowledge kept him awake, his thoughts spinning in circles. The barn was quiet, save for the soft breathing of the wounded girl. Lucas sat in a corner, his back against the wooden wall, staring out into the darkness. He had never felt this helpless before. His hands, skilled in farming and fixing things, were useless here. He had no medicine, no way to treat her injuries properly. His horse, his last connection to the past, was now gone, and he had no way of knowing if his sacrifice would even make a difference. The hours passed slowly. His mind wandered to his family, to the days before the war when things were simpler. The war had taken everything: his father, his brothers, the farm, and even his sense of peace. He had hoped the war would end soon, but it dragged on, taking more and more from him. He had lost so much, but now, here in the barn, with the alien girl, he wondered if there was still a chance for something good. Lucas sighed, rubbing his eyes. The weight of the world seemed to be pressing down on him. What had he been thinking? Helping an alien, one of the invaders who had destroyed so much of his life, was foolish. But then, when he looked at her, lying there so still, he couldn't turn his back on her. She was just a person, like him, caught in the middle of something much bigger than either of them. As the night dragged on, Lucas finally succumbed to sleep, his body too tired to stay awake any longer. But it was a fitful sleep, filled with strange dreams of faraway places, of warships in the sky and strange beings speaking in languages he couldn't understand. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the cracks in the barn's walls, warming the cold wooden floor. The light was soft at first, like the world was waking up gently, but as the sun rose higher, the light grew stronger, casting long shadows across the barn. The quiet was overwhelming, like the world had stopped, waiting for something. Lucas woke slowly, stretching his stiff body. The alien girl was still asleep, her breathing steady, but shallow. He leaned forward, checking her wounds. They seemed no worse, but no better either. He cursed under his breath. He didn't know what to do. He had done all he could, but it didn't feel like enough. He stood and walked to the barn door, looking out at the land. The farm, once full of life and promise, was now just a barren stretch of earth. His heart ached as he thought of all that was lost. The world was changing, and he was just one man in the middle of it, powerless to stop it. But as his gaze swept over the horizon, something caught his eye. In the distance, he saw movement, 3 figures standing against the rising sun. They were far away, but there was something about their presence that made Lucas's heart race. He blinked, unsure of what he was seeing. The figures were tall, moving in unison, their silhouettes outlined by the orange light of dawn. Lucas's pulse quickened. He knew what this meant. The alien girl had sisters. He had heard the stories, of course, the legends of the alien warriors, the sisters who were said to be as strong as they were silent. These warriors were known for their loyalty to each other and their ability to move unseen, like shadows in the night. And now, as the sun rose, the sisters were coming for their own. Lucas felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He didn't know what to expect. Would they be like the other soldiers? Ruthless, merciless, determined to take back the wounded girl? Or were they different like her? He didn't know, but he knew one thing: he had no choice but to wait. He stepped back from the door, moving quietly across the barn. The alien girl was still asleep, her face peaceful but pale. Lucas took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. What was he supposed to do now? Should he run, hide, or wait for them to arrive? His mind raced with the possibilities. But before he could make a decision, the barn door creaked open. Slowly, with no warning, 3 figures stepped inside. They moved like shadows, silent and graceful. At first, Lucas couldn't see them clearly. They were tall, their bodies draped in dark robes that blended seamlessly with the dim light of the barn. But as they stepped closer, he could make out their features. They were not soldiers, but warriors. And one of them, the tallest, was the alien girl's sister. She had the same glowing green eyes, the same pale skin, and the same quiet strength that he had seen in her. But there was something different about her, something commanding. The way she moved, the way she held herself, was nothing like the fragile girl Lucas had helped the night before. The other 2 sisters stood silently behind her, their eyes scanning the barn, taking in their surroundings. They did not speak, but their presence was overwhelming. It was as if the air itself had grown heavy with their silence. Lucas stood frozen, unsure of what to say or do. The eldest sister, who had to be Zara, stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the injured girl on the hay. She looked at Lucas, her expression unreadable, and then back at her sister. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was deafening. Lucas felt like he was caught in some strange dream. These were the sisters of the alien girl, and they had come. But why? What did they want? Then, without a word, Zara knelt beside the girl, her movements slow and deliberate. She placed a hand gently on her sister's forehead, checking for signs of life. The other 2 sisters stood a little farther back, watching with the same quiet intensity. Finally, Zara spoke, her voice soft, yet firm. "She lives." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. But one thing was certain: the sisters were here now, and they would not leave until their sister was well. The silence in the barn was thick, heavy. Zara, the eldest of the 3 sisters, knelt beside her injured sibling. Her green eyes, intense and focused, remained fixed on the girl as she checked for signs of movement, for a pulse, for life. Her movements were careful, precise, as though every action had a deeper meaning. The other 2 sisters, equally silent, stood behind her, their eyes scanning the room with quiet caution. Lucas stood in the far corner of the barn, uncertain of what to do. He hadn't spoken a word since the sisters had entered, and they hadn't spoken to him. He simply watched as they tended to their injured sister. It felt strange, like he was intruding on something personal, something ancient. The sisters did not need to speak. Their actions said everything. Zara's fingers brushed the side of her sister's face, and Lucas couldn't help but notice how gentle she was, despite the strength he knew lay within her. She was not the warrior he had expected. There was a tenderness in her touch, a care that spoke of deep love, of connection. After a long pause, Zara finally looked up at Lucas, her gaze piercing. She spoke softly, but there was no mistaking the power behind her words. "She lives," Zara said, her voice low but full of authority. "But she is weak. We must move her quickly." Lucas's heart skipped. He had feared the worst, but now he could see the relief in Zara's eyes. She stood up and turned to the other two sisters, nodding for them to assist. Without another word, they moved in perfect sync, lifting the injured girl gently. They handled her as if she was the most fragile thing in the world, yet their strength was clear. Each sister moved with grace, as if they were part of the same being, sharing the same thoughts. Lucas watched, still unsure of what to say or do. He had helped the alien girl, but now that her sisters were here, everything felt different. They had come for her, and he had no idea what they would do next. Would they be grateful? Angry? Would they demand something from him in return? He took a step forward, his voice trembling slightly. I gave her my horse, he said, unsure if the words were enough. I couldn't just leave her there. He wasn't sure why he was explaining himself to them. Maybe it was the guilt that still clung to him, the feeling that he had done something wrong by helping. But he couldn't take back what he had done, and it seemed like they needed to know. Zara's eyes softened just a fraction, but there was still a quiet strength in them, a weight that made it clear she wasn't someone who would simply forgive and forget. You did what you thought was right, she said, her voice calm but with an edge of something deeper. And we thank you for it. Lucas didn't know if he should feel relieved or more nervous. Her words were kind, but they carried a weight that made him wonder if she was speaking only out of necessity, not out of true gratitude. He had no idea how alien cultures worked, or what honor meant to them. He only knew that his decision to help was something he would never be able to undo, for better or worse. As the sisters carefully lifted their injured sibling, Lucas stepped back. They moved with such quiet precision, their faces serious and unyielding. They didn't seem like the kind of warriors who shouted or demanded attention. They were silent, their actions speaking louder than any words could. It was a language Lucas didn't understand, but it felt powerful, almost ancient. The barn was silent again, save for the soft sound of the sisters' footsteps as they moved toward the exit. Lucas felt an ache in his chest. He didn't want them to leave. He had helped them, but now he was a stranger to them, someone they couldn't trust fully. He wanted to understand them, to know what they were feeling, but their silence left him with nothing but questions. Will she be okay? Lucas asked, his voice quiet, but filled with concern. Zara paused at the doorway, her back to him. She didn't turn to look at him, but her voice carried the weight of something much older than her. She will be, if we can get her to safety. The sisters didn't linger. They moved with an unspoken urgency, their steps quick but careful as they carried the injured girl toward the barn door. Lucas watched them go, his heart heavy with the knowledge that he might never see them again. The sisters disappeared into the early morning light, their silhouettes blending with the rising sun. The air outside was cold, but the warmth of the sunrise began to touch everything. It was a new day, one that felt full of possibility, but also full of unanswered questions. Lucas stepped outside and stood in the doorway of the barn, watching as the sisters disappeared into the distance. He could still feel the weight of their presence, their quiet power lingering in the air. His thoughts were interrupted when he heard a sound behind him. He turned quickly, his hand instinctively going to the rifle by his side, but it was only the soft whinny of the horse he had given up. The horse had stayed behind, grazing quietly in the field. Lucas walked over to the animal, his hand brushing its mane. He couldn't help but feel a strange connection to it. It was the last thing he had left of his old life. The life before the war had taken everything from him, but now that horse had become something else entirely, a symbol of what he had given up in the name of something greater. For a moment, Lucas stood there, his mind spinning. He had done the right thing, he told himself. He had helped them when they needed it, even though he didn't fully understand why. He didn't know what would happen next, but something had changed. He could feel it in the air, in the way the sisters had looked at him. The world was shifting again, and Lucas wasn't sure if he was ready for what was coming. Lucas stood in the barn long after the sisters had disappeared into the morning light. His thoughts raced, spinning with questions that seemed impossible to answer. What did they want? Why had they come for their sister? And what was the meaning of the stone the eldest sister had given him? He couldn't stop thinking about the way Zara had looked at him, those deep green eyes full of something he couldn't quite understand. It wasn't anger, but something darker, something ancient. There was a depth in her gaze, a knowledge of something beyond this war, beyond their worlds. The stone she had given him was small, no bigger than a fist, but it was smooth and cold to the touch. He had turned it over in his hands 100 times already, studying its strange markings. The symbols were unlike anything he had ever seen, delicate and intricate, like the ancient carvings he had read about in history books but never truly understood. Lucas had thought about asking Zara about it, but the moment she left, he realized he had missed his chance. The sisters had moved with such purpose, and the silence between them was all-encompassing. He knew they weren't like the soldiers who had invaded his world. They were different, and somehow that difference made everything even more confusing. He couldn't help but feel a sense of duty, a responsibility. He had helped their sister, but now the debt felt like it had shifted onto him. Zara had made it clear in her own quiet way that something had passed between them, something unspoken. She had given him the stone, and that gesture weighed heavily on him. Lucas sat down on the hay in the corner of the barn, his hands resting on his knees. The sun had fully risen now, casting its warm light into the barn, but it did little to ease the coldness that had settled in his chest. He stared at the stone, feeling the weight of it, as if it held the answers to questions he didn't yet know how to ask. The wind outside picked up, rustling the leaves of the trees, but Lucas barely noticed. His thoughts were elsewhere. The horse was still grazing in the field, and the silence of the morning seemed to stretch on forever. Hours passed, and Lucas found himself standing again, this time walking out of the barn. He needed fresh air, needed to clear his mind. The land around him looked the same as it always had, empty, broken, and still. The remnants of the farm were scattered like forgotten memories, but Lucas couldn't bring himself to leave. It was all he had left. He walked to the edge of the field, his eyes scanning the horizon, but there was nothing. No sign of the sisters. No sign of anyone. He sighed and rubbed his face, the exhaustion of the past few days catching up with him. Then, just as he turned to head back to the barn, he heard a faint noise. It was quiet at first, but then it grew louder, a soft rustling. He froze. Was it the sisters returning? Had they changed their minds? Or was it something else? He turned slowly, his heart racing. The noise continued, coming from the direction of the woods. He could see nothing at first, just the stillness of the land. But then, there in the distance, he saw movement. Figures, 3 of them. Lucas's breath caught in his throat. The sisters? But these figures were different. They moved more quickly, almost too quickly. Their bodies were cloaked in darkness, their faces hidden beneath hoods. The movement was fluid, almost unnatural, and Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. These weren't the same sisters who had visited him before. These were others, perhaps. The figures grew closer, and Lucas's heart pounded louder in his chest. He instinctively moved toward the barn, his hand reaching for the rifle at his side. He didn't know who these new figures were, but he knew they weren't here for a friendly visit. As the figures came into full view, Lucas could make out their features. They were tall like the sisters, but their skin was darker, more shadowed. Their eyes, too, were different, faintly glowing, but not the bright green of the sisters. These were cold, almost dead-looking. There was no warmth in their gaze, just an eerie stillness. The lead figure raised a hand, signaling for the others to stop. Lucas's breath quickened. He didn't know what to do. Should he confront them? Should he hide? Before he could make a decision, the leader spoke. The voice was smooth, almost hypnotic, but there was an edge to it that made Lucas's skin crawl. "You helped her," the figure said, "but you have not helped yourself." Lucas's eyes widened in surprise. How did they know? How did they know he had helped their sister? He didn't know what to say. His heart raced, his mind spinning with confusion. "What do you want?" Lucas asked, trying to steady his voice. The leader tilted its head, a strange smile forming beneath the hood. "We want what is ours," it said. "The debt you have created, it cannot go unpaid." Lucas didn't understand. Debt? He had given the alien girl his horse, nothing more. He hadn't asked for anything in return, but the figure's words carried a weight, a promise of something much larger than what he had bargained for. The leader stepped closer, the shadows around it seeming to darken, as if the very air was thickening. Lucas instinctively took a step back, his hand tightening around the rifle. "Return what you have taken," the leader said, its voice colder now, "and we will leave. But if you do not—" The figure let the sentence hang in the air, and Lucas knew, without a doubt, that there was something much darker at play than he had realized. The weight of the stone in his pocket seemed to grow, heavier, as if the universe itself was pressing down on him. Zara had given it to him, but now it felt like a burden, a symbol of something greater than he could understand. Lucas stood frozen in place, the rifle still gripped tightly in his hands. His mind raced, but his body was frozen, caught in the tension of the moment. What had he done? What had he gotten himself into? Lucas's heart pounded in his chest as the shadowy figures in front of him moved closer. He had no idea who they were, but their cold eyes and unnerving presence sent a shiver down his spine. His fingers tightened around the rifle, but he couldn't bring himself to raise it. What could he do? These figures were not like the sisters who had come before. They were different, dangerous. He could feel it in his bones. The leader stepped forward, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "You have taken something from us," it said, its voice smooth, almost like a whisper, but with a chilling edge. "And now you must pay." Lucas took a step back, his mind racing. What was happening? He had only helped one of them. He had given her his last horse, but what did that have to do with the danger now standing before him? "What do you want?" Lucas asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The wind howled around them, making the air feel colder. "I've done nothing to you." The leader's lips curled into a smile, but it was not a smile that brought any comfort. It was cold, predatory. "You helped her," the figure said, tilting its head slightly. "And in doing so, you have taken the first step into a world that you do not understand, a world of debts and consequences." The other two figures stood silently behind the leader, watching Lucas with cold, calculating eyes. They didn't move. They didn't speak. It was as though they were waiting for something, for Lucas to make a mistake, perhaps, or for him to give in to fear. "I didn't ask for this," Lucas said, his voice tight. "I just wanted to help." The leader raised a hand, silencing him. "That is the problem," it said, its voice like a soft, deadly hum. "You didn't ask. You acted without understanding the cost. Now we are here to collect what you owe." Lucas felt his blood run cold. What did they mean by collect? What debt was he paying? He had given the alien girl his horse. He hadn't expected anything in return. But now, standing face to face with these figures, the situation seemed much darker than he had imagined. The wind picked up again, making the trees around them sway, their leaves rustling like whispers in the air. It was as though the very world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. "Leave my farm," Lucas said firmly, trying to stand his ground. He wasn't sure where his sudden confidence had come from, but he couldn't let them intimidate him any longer. "I've done nothing wrong." The leader's eyes flickered, and for a moment, Lucas thought he saw a flash of something almost like respect. But then, just as quickly, the coldness returned. "You misunderstand," the leader said, its voice soft but carrying an unsettling weight. "We are not here to harm you, Lucas. Not yet. But you have become involved in something much bigger than yourself, and now you must choose. You can return what you have taken, or we will take what is ours by force." Lucas's heart raced. What could he return? What did they want from him? The stone in his pocket felt heavy again, and he wondered if it was connected to whatever they were talking about. But the more he thought about it, the more confused he became. He had no idea what he was dealing with. All he had done was offer help to a wounded girl, and now his farm, his life, felt like it was being pulled into something he couldn't control. Before he could say anything else, the leader raised its hand again. This time, a strange sound filled the air. Something like a soft humming, a vibration in the very earth beneath his feet. The ground trembled slightly, and Lucas stumbled back, his eyes wide in disbelief. "What is this?" Lucas whispered, his fear growing. He had no idea what was happening, but he could feel the air shifting around him, thickening with tension. The leader's voice cut through the air, calm and unbothered. "It is the power of the debt you have unknowingly accepted, a force that cannot be ignored. Not by you, nor by us." The figure stepped closer, its eyes locked on him. "We could take the stone from you," it said. "But that would be too simple. No, Lucas. We require something more." Lucas's breath caught in his throat. Something more? What did they want from him? What had he gotten himself into? His mind spun, his thoughts too jumbled to form any clear plan. But before he could react, the leader continued. "You will return what is ours," the leader repeated, its voice gaining strength. "The debt must be paid in full." For the first time since they had arrived, the figure's voice hardened, and the air around them seemed to grow colder. Lucas felt the chill cut through his clothes, biting at his skin. He could see the outlines of the sisters, Zara, the eldest, and the other two, slowly emerging from the edge of the woods. They moved with a quiet grace, but their eyes were filled with purpose. Zara stepped forward, her eyes meeting Lucas's. There was a glimmer of understanding in her gaze, but also something darker. She didn't speak, but her presence was enough. The sisters had come to confront the figures. "You do not understand what you are asking for," Zara said quietly, her voice filled with quiet authority. The words were directed at the leader, but Lucas could sense that she was speaking to him too. "You think you can take what does not belong to you, but we will not allow it." The leader turned its cold gaze toward Zara, its smile fading. The air around them grew tense, the wind now howling in anticipation. The three figures stood in silence, and for a moment, Lucas thought he saw a flicker of doubt in their eyes. "This is not your fight," the leader said, its voice low but filled with menace. But Zara didn't back down. "It is our fight, and we will not let you take what is ours." The sisters moved in closer, surrounding Lucas, their silent strength stark contrast to the cold menace of the figures. The tension was palpable, and for a moment it seemed like something was about to snap. The wind howled through the trees, its eerie wail the only sound as Lucas stood, surrounded by the silent sisters. They had arrived just in time, stepping from the shadows with a quiet strength that seemed to fill the air. The figures, those mysterious beings that had come to collect a debt, stayed still, their cold eyes locked on the sisters, their expressions unreadable. Zara, the eldest sister, stood closest to Lucas. Her eyes were sharp, filled with both determination and something deeper, something Lucas couldn't quite understand. She didn't speak at first, but the way she stood, calm, unyielding, told him everything he needed to know. She was prepared for whatever might come next. The leader of the dark figures, standing a few paces away, tilted its head slightly. Its glowing eyes flickered, and for a moment it seemed almost curious. But curiosity quickly turned to cold calculation. "You have no right to interfere," the leader said, its voice low like a distant growl. "This debt was created by your own actions. You too are bound by it." Zara's gaze remained steady. "We are bound by nothing but our own honor," she replied, her voice as calm as the stillness that surrounded them. "You will not take what is not yours." The tension between the two groups hung thick in the air. Lucas could feel it in his chest, his heart hammering with fear and confusion. What had he gotten himself into? He had simply helped the wounded girl, But now he stood on the edge of something much larger, something far more dangerous. For a moment, the leader said nothing. The figures behind it remained silent, watching with eyes that seemed to pierce through him. Lucas stood frozen, not sure whether to run, to fight, or to just keep quiet and hope for the best. He had no idea what would happen next, but he knew one thing. He was caught in the middle of something bigger than he could ever have imagined. Then Zara stepped forward, breaking the tense silence. "You think you can take what belongs to us," she said, her voice gaining strength. "But you do not understand. The debt you speak of is one you cannot claim. It is not for you to take." The leader's eyes narrowed. "You speak of honor, but there is no honor in this. You've chosen your path, and now you must face the consequences." Zara's voice softened but remained firm. "The consequences are yours, not ours. You are mistaken if you think we will allow you to harm this world. We will protect it, and we will protect the human who chose to help, despite the dangers." For a moment, the leader stood still, its expression unreadable. The silence stretched on, heavy and thick, as if the entire world was waiting for something to happen. And then, in a move that took Lucas by surprise, the leader stepped back, its cold gaze sweeping over the sisters and Lucas one last time. "Very well," it said, its voice icy. "But remember this, human. The debt is not forgotten. It will follow you, even across the stars." With that, the figures turned and disappeared into the trees, their movements swift and quiet, like shadows, vanishing in the dark. The air around them seemed to release a breath it had been holding for too long. Lucas blinked, trying to process what had just happened. The figures were gone, but the weight of their words lingered. The debt was not forgotten. It would follow him. What did that mean? He didn't understand, but something in his gut told him it was far from over. Zara turned to him, her expression softening. "You did not know what you were taking on," she said, her voice gentle now. "But you acted with compassion. That is why we came, to ensure that you are not alone in this." Lucas didn't know what to say. His mind was still reeling, the events of the past days too much to fully comprehend. But as he looked into Zara's eyes, something deep inside him stirred. He had given his last horse to someone who needed it, and now he had a part to play in something far greater than he had ever imagined. The other two sisters stood behind Zara, their eyes fixed on Lucas, their expressions unreadable. But there was something in the way they looked at him, something that spoke of understanding, of a shared history, and of a future he couldn't yet grasp. "We will protect you," Zara continued, "but understand this. The path ahead will not be easy. There will be others who come seeking what you have unknowingly taken, and you must be ready." Lucas nodded, though he wasn't sure what being ready even meant. All he knew was that the world had changed in ways he couldn't explain, and he was caught in the middle of it. Zara reached into her cloak, pulling out a small object, something similar to the stone she had given him before. But this time, the object was glowing, faintly pulsing with a soft light. She held it out to him, her gaze steady. "This," she said, "is a gift. A map. A guide. It will lead you to a place where you will find answers. Answers that will help you understand what has happened and what is to come." Lucas took the glowing object from her hand, feeling its warmth. The stone in his pocket seemed to hum in response, as if reacting to the new object. He looked up at Zara, but before he could ask anything, she turned to leave, her sisters following her in silence. As the sisters disappeared into the distance, the wind began to calm and the sky overhead brightened. The sun was rising higher now, the warmth of its rays filling the land with light. Lucas stood there for a long moment, staring at the glowing object in his hand. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. His life was no longer his own. He had helped the alien girl, and now the galaxy itself seemed to be watching him,